lot of what's keeping us from moving forward is we don't have a good understanding of what's happening now. And so if you're looking for a change or needing an adjustment, like take a really good, hard look at what's happening now. Ask your students, ask leaders, figure out like what do you want the answers to. Come up with this simple Google survey form, send it out to them, and then start to make decisions based off of that. Keep it simple in the sense of nail down your service, nail down your leader culture, nail down your small group setup first before you move on to anything else. And then if you don't, it's really easy to get stuck in the weekly grind, every other week where you could only think about things 6 months from now. That's where I think you kind of get into because if you do the first two things, you'll kind of know what's happening now, and then it allows you to dream better for future things.
What's going on, Next Gen Leaders, in this episode with Justin Knowles, an absolute youth ministry legend. We get into some amazing things about simplifying your ministry and focusing on what really matters in order to grow. I hope this episode is a blessing to you. And if you haven't had the chance yet, I want to encourage all of you to go check out my online Next Gen ministry community in the link below. So check it out. Join the community today. It's totally free. Hop in there and be encouraged by one another. Now, enjoy the episode.
Just chilling? Just hanging?
Just hanging. Dude, you got the Christmas lights up. It's time.
I'm in the band green room. That's what they got going.
I feel like in California, though, like it's not really like does it feel like Christmas because it's so like nice? It's just like less nice than it is in the summer, or maybe more. I don't know.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie today. It's like 69 degrees and sunny, so it's pretty nice.
Amazing. It's amazing.
Pretty dang nice.
But
well, I'm in it,
bro. Yeah, you're it. Well, I mean, yeah, let's get into it, man. Like, what are you doing now? You're back in the campus role, or like it's one location?
One location for now. And so we launch our first multi-site setting at Easter. And so that will be, and I knew that going into it. And so they're going to be, launching a new campus, probably like 10 miles away, in like the biggest city that we pull from outside of where we're currently at. Mostly because they built a building. They've been in church for 17 years. They built a building like 3 years ago. I've already outgrown the building. And so instead of building more, they're like, we have to go wider because of finances and stuff like that. So we're launching a campus. So they have a plan they want to plant 15 churches, which they've done 3. And they want to have 5 campuses. That's like the long-term goal.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I'm curious your perspective on being at like a crazy multi-site where you're like you're trying to coordinate all this stuff. I mean, we did multi-site here. We've got the 4 locations and probably going to be more down the road and stuff like that. What's your perspective on multi-site versus like, hey, you should just go play it, do your own thing? Or are you a fan?
Yeah, I mean, like I had someone else ask me the same question, like now that you've been back in the single site for a little bit, like has your thoughts changed for multi-site? And no, I feel like in order to continue to reach people, like you're gonna have to hit a whole bunch of, like there's gonna need to be a whole bunch of different kind of churches. So like some are gonna be plants, some are gonna be multi-site, some are gonna be, the single site, whatever it is, and you kind of need all of them. Like I still love my time at Sandals and at One and All before, which were both multi-site, and then now being at a single site for a little bit until they launched this new one, then it's kind of like no, I get why people do it, and it's still effective in all the things. It's just with me and like in my role of like being like the solo guy again, I'm like, yeah, there's definitely parts that I miss from multi-site setting, like the team, like having a team of people, staff that you're constantly pouring into, working with, strategizing with, which is all great because it's like a lot of when I would visit campuses, a lot of that stuff would be so fun to kind of see how God's working in all these different cities. And then now being like the solo guy, like kind of everything revolves around if I get it done or not. you know, then like that's been fun too. Like I kind of missed that. And so, and I've realized like there's definitely aspects from the multi-site that I've missed, but then there's also aspects that I haven't been in for 12 years, I would say, in like the single site solo youth pastor role, where I'm like, dang, I missed this. I forgot how good I was at this. Like I missed the grind of like doing stuff and like being able to turn on a dime because I'm the only one that really makes a decision on what's happening. And so I could make a decision and like on Monday for Wednesday and not have to go through like a whole process. So like I definitely miss that kind of stuff. And even like at the single site where I'm at now, like I have so much freedom to do like it's not as much like red tape or a process. Like they just kind of let me do what I do and they let me make whatever decision I need to make without having to ask for permission or like, I think about this. Are we going to do this? Can we do this? And then it's more like, nah, we're going to do this. And then, and then I could just do it. So
Yeah,
there's pros and cons.
I was just on a call right before this with another youth pastor, and he's just getting started. He like just got at his new church. He's got a youth group of like 15 kids that are coming. He's like, it's exciting, and there's some discouragements, when you start a new thing and you're like, oh man, I gotta restart. But I was just trying to encourage him, like, you only get this time once. I
Mhm.
was like, dude, in like a year, because you're going to be consistent, you're going to crush it. Like there can be 50 kids coming. And I'm like, and then you'll never get the time with that 15 back. And every season, every stage, you have like a different, there's pros and cons to everything. And I'm sure some of it's kind of how you're wired, like, some of it, or how God's made you, or whatever, however you want to articulate that. But there's just like sweet things at each stage. We've kind of hit this point at my campus now where we're hiring more staff. And now it's kind of like, you're just doing all this administration and all this kind of mid-level leadership development stuff. And you kind of miss like that sweetness of like, oh man, like I love just having like my team, and
Mhm.
my people that I get to pour into. And I really get to know the lives of like all my leaders and small group leaders, and rather than just trying to coordinate the massive camp or like just make sure all your youth pastors are doing and what they're supposed to be doing. It's just a different thing. But yeah, man, I'd love to hear just like tell something a little bit about the transition, how that has been for you, and would love to hear just kind of like as you've been reflecting some leadership things that you've been thinking, just lessons you've kind of learned through your time at Sandals, kind of transitioning back into a smaller, more focused context.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. So like we've officially started, right?
Oh yeah.
We recorded. Oh, like we've been going. All right. Nice. uh, nice. Okay. Yeah, so for context, I've been in my current position for 3 months, which is at a thing that's called Vantage Point Church, which is in East Vale, California, kind of in the Inland Empire. I don't know if you're listening and you know California geography. It's north of Orange County, it's west of Riverside, and it's in this like little San Bernardino um, county, and yeah, I've been the youth pastor for the last 3 months it's a single site church for now. We're about to launch, like I said, at Easter, a new campus. But for the last 12, and I'm the only one on staff. So average around 200 kids on a Wednesday night. And the last 12 years before coming here, I've been in like a multi-site youth ministry setting. And so maybe even before, I'd say longer, maybe like 15, because I worked at Saddleback, which is multi-site, but it was very different than how I've operated before. Like a lot of their youth ministry stuff is all autonomous. So each campus is kind of literally does their own thing. Went to one and all church for about 8, where started as a single site and then grew to 4 campuses, and then went to Sandals for 5 years, where we started with 8 campuses, and then by the time I left, in after 5 years, we had 14. So we launched 6, 7, whatever the math is, campuses in the 5 years. And then now at a single site, like 10 minutes from my house, it's great. And so that's kind of been my context in like youth ministry. This is my 18th year. This summer will be 18 years in youth ministry. So been around the block in regards to in the youth ministry world.
Is it
And
like dog
so,
years where like you like what does that translate to? Are you
dude,
like 80? You're like 70 or
COVID was
80?
dog years. Yeah, COVID was dog years, dude.
I'm 80
Like
years
that,
old in youth pastor years.
man. So when I was at when I got hired in Sandals, which is based in Riverside, has 14 locations across California. That was when we started. We had 8 campuses. It was 6 months before COVID is when I started as like the youth ministry director across all the campuses. And then COVID hit, and that was like I've never worked harder in my life to navigate all of that. And in the 5 years, 2.5 of those years, I oversaw birth to high school. So like I oversaw like kids and students. And so like worked on like reopening and that whole process. And if you know anything about California, it's way crazier than I think a lot other places were during that time. And
Dude,
so,
my wife and I went to New Orleans during COVID just for like vacation. And it was like November 2020, like peak haywire. And it was awesome. It was like we went to church and we were wearing masks. I had a little old lady came up. She was like, "Oh, y'all don't need no masks in here."
yeah,
And I was like, "I like it in here." So not to get controversial about that whole situation, but I was like, it was refreshing. I know that you guys face some crazy uphill battles of like, how do we minister to people? How do we pastor? How do we grow? How do we lead
yeah,
in this time where even just getting people in the same place is like feels almost impossible.
yeah. Well, I feel like Sandals was way more like we were like one of the first churches to open back up in California, like way sooner. I think we were only closed for like 23 weeks or something like that. And then we started meeting again. And so, which was pretty controversial at the time, if I remember correctly. And so, but yeah, so like going from like a spot like that, got to see overseas, I think a staff of like 22 people total between all the locations by the time that I ended. And then, we were running a pretty like, I would say like franchise model of youth ministry, like where it's the same, like kind of like you have the same idea, same content, same small group questions, same format across all the different locations. And then towards my end of my time at Sandals, which is what ultimately ended my time there, was they moved to more autonomy as they realized like it was, because we're in like these vast difference differences of communities. Like we had San Bernardino, which is like one of the poorest cities in California, to Fresno, which is like farm town, to like Arrowhead, which is mountain town, to suburbs, to like just a huge array of types of community in our congregation. And they realized, man, we can't just copy and paste what happens at the main campus to all the campuses. Like we need a little bit more flexibility and autonomy for campuses to do more in their community that reflects what's going on locally. And so, in my time there, like saw a bunch of growth. I mean, let me back up even more. Going from the church I was at before to Sandals was not a good transition. It was like I was there for 8 years, was called into the office, hey, your last week's next week, like type of thing, out of the blue. A lot of hurt that came from that. Going to Sandals, which was super healthy, did a lot of things right, great leadership, walked me through my hurt while letting me lead. And then when they were going through the transition of, okay, we need more autonomy. So therefore, hey, Justin, your role is going to change because we don't need like a central youth pastor anymore. We're going to start to work towards autonomy, and we're going to start in the youth ministry world to kind of test that out. And it was about a year-long process of like, I knew my role was going to change. I kind of didn't know what it was going to look like. And then probably in June of this year, 2024, is they said, hey, we're going to actually um, dissolve your role because we're going to let all the youth ministries at each campus kind of run their own program. And then so therefore we don't need a central role anymore. But we like, they gave me a couple options to choose from to be on staff still, but it just wasn't a fit for me or where we wanted to be. Like the main role was like at the youth pastor at a campus in Redlands, which is about an hour away from me. And so my wife and I were like, nah, that's not the move for us. And so we declined the role, not knowing what was next. And then Sandals hooked me up with where I'm at now. So like they actually like helped me in the process of finding another position at a great church that is closer to my house in a community that we live in. And so yeah, that was like in August, and then I got hired. I was done at Sandals in August, started here in September. I had like a month off and then started the role here.
That's a lot of change, but it's also just interesting. Like I noticed a trend. Everything you're saying, you're like, I was at here, and we wrote it from this many campuses to this. Like that. Like every, not just to brag on you, but like every ministry you've been a part of has grown substantially, significantly. And I would love to hear your thoughts, even just reflecting back. What have been some keys to that? Because I understand like there's basic principles, as a leader, as a ministry leader, as a pastor to help, whether it's casting vision, from structure. What have been some of the trends? You're like saying every one of these journeys, these have been some things that we've been implementing to really grow our ministries, and take ground.
Yeah.
Hey, I hope that you are loving the episode. But before we get back to the content, I just want to ask two big things of you. Number one is, if you are enjoying this episode and it's bringing value to you, please share it with a friend. If you can subscribe, that would be amazing, but share the content with somebody that would find it valuable today. And number two is to hop in our online community. I created an online space. It's totally free to connect youth pastors with other youth pastors, to share ideas, content, encouragement, things that you're going through. So hop in the community in the description below. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean it it is cool to think about in the sense of like whatever I've been a part of, God's been working and growing the ministry, which has been super cool. Like I could think back all the way to when I left Saddleback and went to One and All Church in San Dimas. We started with 70 kids on a Wednesday night, and then over the 8 years grew it to about like 600 kids, which is nuts. And then going from One and All to Sandals, starting with 8 campuses to 14, averaging 400 students on a Wednesday night to 900 on Wednesday nights between the campuses. And then coming from Sandals to here, where their average this year is like 160 or so. But since we've started and since I've been here, we haven't dropped below 180 and even hit up to like the 250 mark. And so like it's just been what I've noticed and like been reflecting on of like, okay, why? Like, right, because that's always the question of like what's happening? Like
Yeah.
why is that? And I think if I were to look back on it, is that most of like what I'm really good at, like one of my favorite questions to ask in interviews is all right, if like humility aside, if someone like if you were to say like you're the best at this, like what are you great at that if someone you would wipe the floor with everybody else with this, whatever that thing is, what would that be? I think my answer would be I'm really good at taking broken things and fixing them and like getting into a point of health. And so when I look at like One and All, like it was pretty chaotic, brought structure. When I came to Sandals, it was pretty chaotic, brought a lot of structure. When I came here, it was pretty chaotic, and then started to bring some like structure and like systems that are in place. And so I think one of the things that why we've seen some good growth of just wherever I've been is just I'm a systems and structure kind of guy. And I think that people, both leaders and students, strive off of structure, even though we feel like we don't want to be too like structured in a box. But I feel like every organization, every ministry needs to have some sort of system and structure in order to thrive. To like you have to build the machine, and then once the machine's done, then you could just all you have to do is maintain the machine. And so like once people know what to do, how to do it, why they do it, and then you have like system like here's a win, like leaders know what they're doing to win. They know what to do when they come here. They know if they're being successful. Same with students. They know what to do, why they're there. Here's how we're going to grow. Like, and then even within our ministry, like system of how we're structured of Wednesday nights to small groups to discipleship, like once it's all kind of set and you kind of find your rhythm of wherever place that you're at, then you're able to like you have to give it like a year or two to like develop, make adjustments along the way, and then it kind of like it just kind of starts to feed itself in whatever it is. But what I feel like a lot of people miss is that they don't have like a set, like they're too quick to change something when it doesn't seem to be working. And so part of like the youth ministry world, like you have to be able to play it out. You have to be able to let it go a longer time in order to see like a whole season, a whole year before you start making any adjustments. And I think part of my strategy for like leading is like, all right, once I kind of establish all right, here's what's needed, here's what's missing, here's the gaps, develop systems to kind of help fulfill those gaps, and then let it play out for a while before before we start to adjust anything. Like I feel like that's the biggest thing that I've learned how to do in my leading the ministries that I've been leading for like the last 12, 15 years.
Yeah. How did you learn how to do that? Because I think people, I mean, even me sitting here, I'm thinking I need to learn how to do that better. I think every leader has some intuitive things that they didn't necessarily, hey, I went to this seminar, I read this book, whatever, that is just sort of in you based off of kind of how God's created you. But how did you learn how to do that?
I don't know, to be honest with you. Like I think my when I look at our ministry or how people lead or how they structure stuff, I think in my head I could say, okay, here's A, we're at A. I know that we need to get to B, and then in my head I could, after I kind of sit and evaluate, like I could go like, okay, well here's A, B, C, and D of how we get to B. Like here's 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A to get to B. And then after a couple years, B is now the new thing. And then okay, now we could get to C. And then here's 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D, and kind of like start to layer it out. And so I don't know. I don't think I've like learned it. I think this is how my mind works in the sense of, I think part of it, I think if you were to do like practical, part of it is I don't think a lot of youth pastors currently evaluate what's happening now in order to see how to get move forward. So like for instance, like when I came into my role here, one of the first things I did was I took a survey of all of our leaders. I took a survey of all of our students of just things that I like want to know. So like on a scale of 1 to 10, how good do you think our sermon series have been? On a scale of 1 to 10, how good do you feel about sharing in small groups? In a scale of 1 to 10, how confident would you feel inviting a friend to a Wednesday night? Like just kind of like evaluating what's currently is, because then you'd be able to take some of those metrics and some of those surveys. And when I show our leaders, hey, our students don't feel like they want to bring anybody, that's a problem. Numbers don't lie. I think we got like 120 survey results out of the 150 kids that were coming at the time when I first got here, and said, this is what we have. We have to fix this. And we have to like be honest with what's happening now in order to adjust what we want, where we want to go later. And so I did the same, like students and leaders kind of got an idea of where people are at based off of whatever questions that I was curious about, whether they were knowing, and then saying, okay, well, if this is a low score here, then here's how we begin to fix this. And we start to like move it up. Our students said that it feels pretty serious all the time, which in turn sends to me like they want a little bit more fun on Wednesday nights. And so we started, like, they didn't really do games or prizes or nothing like that. So we started implementing that. And then even within the last 3 months, I mean, we've seen like a 20% increase of first time students, you know, just because of like, I listened to them, evaluated what's currently happening into, all right, well, we want to see more new students. So now we're starting to see more students because I listened to what they were asking before. And so I feel like part of anything of where I started, that's always where I started, was taking an inventory of what's currently happening in order to determine, okay, here's the goals now that we got to set for whatever future things that we want to see. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I feel like I'm
absolutely.
just yeah, I feel like I'm just rambling, but that's kind of like my approach coming in here. And even at Sandals, like I did the same thing. Took surveys, got an idea of where we currently stand on how people feel about the content, the service, if leaders feel supported or not. And then if they didn't, then I started making adjustments to making sure that they did feel supported. Do they feel like they're making a difference when they are here? Okay, well, how do you make leaders feel like they're making a difference? Well, make sure that their wins are clear. And so that they know, like, if I do these four things, I'm killing it. And so making sure that they understand when they come on a Wednesday night, if I do these things, I know I'm doing a good job, which ultimately in turn helps the ministry move forward with whatever you're trying to do.
Absolutely. I think I've stole from you years ago training some of our leaders. One of your little checklists that you guys shared on a podcast that you and Sean run with Youth Ministry Hacks. Just making the win really clear,
Hmm.
and just providing clarity for everyone. Whether it's the
Yeah.
kid, like, hey, this is who we are as a ministry, and like when you're going to come here, this is what you're going to experience. To the leader, hey, this is what winning looks like. This is what we want you to actually do. That way, you're not feeling discouraged all the time. That's huge.
Yeah. Well, I feel like a part of it too is like it's clarity is kindness. Like you think in because part of clarity also brings accountability. Because you could have clarity, but if you have no accountability, then you're still spinning your tires. So like if I have clarity with my leaders and I have someone who's not doing the things that we need them to do, but I don't hold them accountable to it, then nothing's going to move. And so part of what I've been doing here is like I've taken on a new role, taken over a guy who's here for 10 years, who's still here, who is loved, and he's great. He's been great to work with. But like part of it, they're like, oh no, Justin is like, if I don't tell him that I'm not coming, I'm getting a text that night, like, hey man, where are you? You didn't tell me you're not coming. Like part of being a great leader is communication. You know what I mean? Like there's those aspects of it that are I think it's hard to do sometimes because you want to be liked. And so part of it is like you're afraid to like ruffle feathers, but part of clarity has to be accompanied with accountability in order to make sure that you're holding people accountable to what you've set in order to like that's how you move forward.
Yeah. I'm sure you've seen some trends of consistent things, whether it's been you know, saddle back to, like all the churches that you've been at. When you're thinking through systems, because you're talking like, hey, you're a systems guy, what are the systems that you're like, those have to be in place and these have to work? Because I
Mm,
know like the feeling of stepping into something, feeling like, I don't even know where to start. I feel like everything's broken. I feel like the small group system's not working. The kids don't want to invite their friends. Our scope and sequence and what we're teaching and the calendar feels too cluttered or too scattered. I don't even know where to start. So just for people listening, and I think it might be helpful just to give some clarity to that when you're getting down to the basics. Like, hey, if you're going to step in somewhere, like, hey, these 2-3 things have to work, because if they don't work, nothing else works.
yeah. Yeah, I think the first one would be like, you have to start with the program. And so like establishing and figuring out what's working and what's not working within like in our context where a Wednesday night, middle school and high school combine, do a service, break into small groups afterwards. And so part of that is establishing, okay, what's working, what's not, and then setting the program to what you think it needs to be based off of what I've heard students and leaders want/need. And then figuring out, okay, what is the process that of the order program to make sure that it flows nice and it feels thought out and intentional. Second part is just leader clarity on, and that goes from like the leader onboarding process. Because, if you're anything like me, when I got here, I probably lost 10 leaders, like right off the bat. So, but part of that was like, hey, here's the kind of the new standard. And then knowing that people were like just waiting for, they were holding on because they liked the guy who was there before. And so when the new guy comes in, they're like, all right, I'm out. And that's not a bad
It
thing. Like I
happens.
actually
No,
gave,
it happens that churn is healthy. It's pruning.
yeah, I
It's
gave
not bad.
everybody an option, of like, hey, if this is not your thing anymore, and now that I'm coming in, like by all means, like let me know now. Like get out now. So that way, like, and there's no hard feelings. I'm not attached to you or anybody yet. And so like, let's just guilt free step out. Like that's great. So I think the second part is establishing like a leader onboarding process, establishing, okay, what are the wins for leaders in your ministry to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing. And then giving away authority to leaders to be able to actually step up and lead. Because at least here I felt like everything, like even like little things that for small groups, like people were asking me for permission, and I'm like, it's your small group. Lead however you feel like you need to be led. As long as you hit these four things, that's all that matters. And so like you could take ownership of that. So it's kind of establishing the culture of what you want your leaders and like just leader care and understand, like making sure leaders feel like they know what they're doing, that they're cared for beyond just being a pawn in the ministry, and that they actually feel like they're a part of something bigger. So like those are like the three things with like leader wise. And then beyond that, from like a bigger scope, is if I was coming into a new spot, like I would almost like clear the calendar of what was planned and reevaluate. So like put everything on the chopping block. Every sermon series that was planned, every event that was planned, summer camp that was scheduled, like everything that you can, I would I would vastly pull it back. And then as you figure out number one and number two, then you start to put in your like strategy for like calendaring and events and summer camp and dates and all that kind of stuff. What sermon series you do, so that way it only feeds into your youth ministry on Wednesdays or Sundays, wherever you meet. It plays into your leaders, and then now your calendar is a part of your strategy that feeds into the youth ministry and the leader culture.
Yeah,
And so,
and I think that's just the whole concept of like the flagship thing. And not that ministry is like a business, but obviously the principles apply. You know, I've always heard it said, like, take Apple. Like they just knew early on, like if the iPhone doesn't work, like none of the other products really work. Like they have an iPad and they have a MacBook and you can buy a little desktop and all the other crap that they sell. But like if the iPhone doesn't work, like that's the anchor that gets you into the ecosystem. You know, and I think a lot of, and I've even been there, this spot myself, trying to do too many things. Like I have my program and I've got this thing that I'm doing on Sundays and I got my student leader team and I got camp, I got this conference, I got this other event, and we got my side Bible studies happening and my house groups or whatever. And it's like, it almost doesn't really matter what your thing is. Like if you're a house church deal and like that's what you do, like decentralized small groups is your thing, then like, okay, that's your thing, but that thing better work before you
right.
do more of something else. You know, it's kind of that like, more, better, more, better, different. Like, I think it's easy to get caught up in the new shiny, like, ooh, that church is doing this, we should try that. Or, ooh, this church is doing that, we should shift that. Kind of to your point of like, we just don't run the play long enough. I mean, I've been my own worst enemy getting excited about trying new things because it's fun, because I'm kind of entrepreneurial. Versus
Yeah.
like, hey, what are the few things that we're doing that's working? What if we just cut everything else and just did more of that? And then just hit the more button until it starts to dip. And then it's time to maybe change it, to freshen it. And then maybe when enough changes isn't helping, maybe then that's time for us to step into a season of doing something different. And it's so
Yeah.
easy to like get off of that philosophy of like less is more, simplicity is better, as long as what you're doing is really like what Jesus has asked you to do. As long as it's really like accomplishing your mission, like maybe you don't have to do a million things. Maybe you just have to do one thing really well. Maybe making Wednesdays amazing is what you need to do. I don't know. Have you seen that in the ministry of just keeping things simple and continuously improving and mining that out more? How does that look for you?
Yeah. Like I've always remembered, I had a buddy that worked at Life Church, biggest church in the United States, I would say, 41 campuses, multiple states, you know,
41 campuses.
yeah, crazy.
Wow.
And so, and what I like about them is they just unapologetically do five things. They don't do anything outside of the five things. Whatever the five, I forget, I can't tell you what they are, but I know it's like, we just do this, this, and this. And so part of that is like, whether if I'm starting something new, which I have, which I'm in, or if you need to reevaluate your ministry, is you kind of have to just go back to the basics and kill it in those couple areas, like kill your service, kill small groups, kill your leader culture. Like if you were to
Maybe
like,
maybe crush is a better term versus like, don't kill it, like stop doing it. Like
no, not,
you
yeah,
need
not like,
double down, baby.
yeah. If you were to only focus on three things, like have those be the three things, like make your service the best possible, make your small groups the best possible, make your leader culture the best possible, and like start with that before you add anything else to the deal. Like I had plans to do stuff for schools, here, but I'm not ready to do that yet because I don't feel like our Wednesday nights are where it needs to be. I don't feel like our small groups are where they need to be, and I don't feel like our leader culture is where they need to be. And so part of it is like I'm just only focusing kind of on those three things right now, 3 months in, to try to get those to where I feel like, okay, now I can move on because now the system's been built. Now it's maintaining the machine. Now I can start to build a new one over here, And so, and I feel like that's and in that process, like we've seen growth. Like once things kind of are healthy, it's clear, the culture's been set, and you're the advocate for that culture. Like I think students and leaders notice that, and then they're like, okay, now they're taking it serious. Now I feel comfortable about inviting friends. Now I feel comfortable that they're like, this is a place where they're like, okay, I could grow here. I'm being challenged here. I could talk about my faith here. Leaders feel like they know what they're doing. They're excited to be here. They feel like they're doing something bigger than themselves and actually making a difference. That's how you continue to see growth moving forward before adding anything else new.
As you're stepping into the new season, new church, and you're doing these things we're talking about right now, kind of tightening up the bolts and all these. When do you feel it's the time to start dreaming about something new? And how do you go through that process of sitting with the Lord, dreaming about the future, where to expand? Because I think like a lot of people wrestle with what does youth ministry look like in a crazy time where technology is expanding fast, where culture's changing really quickly. Shifting to just think about the future of youth ministry a little bit, like how do you balance doing these core things yet also leaving space and pioneering into trying new things?
I mean, my mindset right now, I'm only focused on those three things that I talked about, the service, the small groups, the leaders. I do have time. I have a time blocked off 2 hours every other week where I'm only thinking about things like 6 months from now. And so I think like for me, like, cause the grind is so real, like Wednesdays every week. I don't know if you know that or not, but every week there's a Wednesday. And so like
Well
I could,
aware.
yeah, I could only think, I could easily just be trapped in like what I need to do this week to kind of make things happen. And so like for me, like I live by my calendar. So I even put what I'm working on and when I'm working on it in my calendar, even if no one else is holding me accountable to it. Like I put it in there. This hour I'm working on my message. This hour I'm working on my emails. This hour I'm working on this event. Like like every hour is accounted for in my calendar. And so part of what I do is I put 2 hours a week or every other week where I'm not working on anything immediate, but working on things later or thinking through things. And so like what I'm thinking through right now, again, so I just had a meeting yesterday. We have kind of have like these core volunteers. There's four of them that help me oversee different areas in our ministry. So like connections and like first time students, someone whoever helps me oversee groups, someone who does worship, someone who does production. And so what I was telling them yesterday was, okay, you know, I'm thinking about moving our service times. And so I'm not going to do that though until March. Like I'm going to wait until we're kind of already in a low season and we're going to move service times 30 minutes earlier. And then that will play into summer camp. Like that'll lead us into summer camp. Once summer camp happens, we're going to launch Youth Alpha. Youth Alpha is like a discipleship tool that we're going to use for students who want to dive deeper, kind of bottom of the funnel, for students who want to go deeper into their faith. And then that will launch into the fall, where wherever we land on changing up our service, it's going to happen in the fall. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I know that whatever we're working on right now is not going to be sustainable long term for our ministry, like how our Wednesday nights and small groups are set up. But I know that we'll figure it out by the summertime this summer, and then whatever we're going to change is going to happen in the fall. So just even like thinking through like a strategy of calendaring of like we have this much time to think through this. This couple months should give us enough info to make a decision on this, which then once we land on there, then we can like move to the next phase of whatever we're doing in the fall. And so I think that in the fall, our ministry will look a lot different than it currently does as it stands right now. But that's like 8 months from now, 9 months from now. And so like we're kind of already taking steps and evaluating now of what's going to come in September, even though I don't know what it is yet. But I know that we're working through the process of evaluation, trying these new things until we kill it in these areas. And then once we feel like the current areas are thriving, then we're going to again, go back to the surveys, reevaluate service, reevaluate leaders, reevaluate content, and then make decisions based off what I don't know yet. Which is like such a weird thing to think of, just something to think about. Like I know it's going to look different. I don't know what it looks like, but I know it's not going to be the same. And
Yeah.
so, and again, it's a long term. Like youth ministry is a long game, you know. Like because when I think about it, like we have a really big senior class right now, really big. So when they leave, it's going to be kind of devastating to my numbers and metrics. And so, but I can't think about our seniors right now. I need to think about our freshmen. Like what's the ministry going to look like when they're seniors? And I need to make adjustments according to them based off where I think we're going to go and how our ministry set up and structured that's going to best set them up because it's a long play and you can't make any of those decisions within a year of you being somewhere.
No,
Like
you can't.
I have to go through the full cycle of fall, winter, spring, summer before I could even really make any big decisions on where we're going.
It's pretty interesting when you look at the strategy behind. I've always really been fascinated with college ministries. I was a part of a college ministry at a big state school here at Kansas State University, and it wasn't really, when you're a part of it, you just get kind of sucked into the track. But then it took me a couple years being out of it to really realize, like, oh my gosh, like that was so brilliant that they sort of lived on this 4 to 5 year cycle of what you're talking about, of really having like simplifying at each stage, like, hey, this is our primary target of what we're trying to do with each kid at each stage, with each student. And obviously the context is a lot different with college ministry, but I was just really blown away thinking through the intentionality. So you're talking about of like, as your seniors go, like, how do we, instead of just focus on that too much, like shift our attention, to freshmen, and then knowing at each stage, like this is even the same thing you're talking about, like really making the ask really clear in the win, like, hey, this is our goal for everybody at this life stage, knowing that everyone's spiritual journey is different. And, the basics of, hey, look, if you're coming and you're a junior and you're not following Jesus, your next steps, making a decision to follow Christ and get baptized. Like, that's just like, that's 101.
Right.
But just ratcheting down the intentionality and the strategy at each stage, I think is really fascinating to me. So it'll be interesting to see, like maybe if we have a sit down a year from now or in the fall, like how that's changed and how like the building blocks that you're making now, really end up becoming the bridge to where everything's going to be. It's going to be really exciting to see.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it is like, I think if I were to like sum it up in the ease, like all I'm trying to do right now is make Wednesdays healthy, make small groups healthy, and make our leader culture healthy. And that's going to look different in every season, I think. And so, but once they're healthy, then I'm able to make longer term decisions for how the ministry is going to go. And like, and that might look different than what it looks like now. There's, I've been talking about like, if we continue to grow and see it, like, I mean, if you want me to be like fully vulnerable and honest, like of what's in my head of like what's happening is like, we could do, like, we're out of space at our campus for groups, like just existing groups, let alone with growth. Like if I wanted to add more groups, I have nowhere else to put groups. And
I'm
so,
right in the same boat. And it's like,
yeah,
there's only so many options. Like,
yeah. and then so like what I'm thinking through is, all right, well, I want it to be healthy, and we're going to go until we can't physically put any more people anywhere. And so, but we're going to get healthy, and healthy things grow. And so we're going to hopefully continue to see the growth that we've seen, but what I'm thinking through, and again, this is where like I think people either make a decision too soon and they don't let like go the long play. Like I could do, all right, well, do we do junior high groups before service and then have everybody meet for service together and then have high school groups meet after service? So that way the room basically doubles of like capacity wise. Do we do home groups where Wednesday night's the main service and then we figure out how to do Sunday night and Monday night as home groups based off of area? Or do we do like, can I justify a hire where we move high schools, keep it on Wednesday nights and then go Thursday night middle school and where we split up that way? All of those are a legitimate option that I don't know the answer to. But like what I'm doing right now is just trying to get to a point of health of making like I want to make sure that the what I have available now is the best option in our area for service, for groups, and for leaders to serve. And then once I feel like that's healthy, that will help me determine the move that I need to make in like a huge shift of whatever needs to happen. And then let that shift play out wherever we land for at least 2 years before we determine if that's successful or not. Right. And that's already
Right.
thinking like that's like 2027, 2028. Like that's like, I think that's the mindset that I feel like a lot of youth pastors don't have in like the long term of success in their youth ministry is like thinking that far ahead, not knowing where you're going to land, but like you have to kind of have that mindset of leading and being able to wait it out to see like what's successful or not.
And I think that's just where the role of prayer and resting on what the Holy Spirit puts on your heart at the time, is like, hey, if we're faithful, with so many biblical principles there, like if we're faithful with what God's given us, He will multiply it and He will make the step as clear as He can.
Right.
And eventually you have to take a step of faith and make a programming shift. Eventually you have to take a step of faith and make a hire. You're like, I don't know if this is the right person, but this is what we should at least try, But in every season, to your point, like we're going to focus on being healthy and we're going to focus on being as spirit-led as we possibly can while being as faithful to make what we're doing right now as good as it can possibly be. And I think if there's a take home for me from this conversation, anybody listening, hopefully, like it's that just get as good as you possibly can and make as the few simple things, the program, the leader culture, and like
Small groups.
the small groups. Yeah. Like as high quality, as excellent as it can be, as faithful to those things. Cause really that's where the magic happens. That's as good as it gets, as much as you possibly can and not get so distracted or not be as scatterbrained. And I'm curious your thoughts on this. What are some distractions you see pop up for a lot of youth pastors? I know you're in a lot of youth ministry circles. You talk to a lot of youth pastors. Are there common things that you see that pop up? You're like, okay, these are just rabbits you're wasting time on. Not that they're wrong, not that they're bad, but that you could easily almost get like a little, hey, pitfall. Don't get sucked into putting too much time and attention here because that's not the main thing. What have been some things you've seen?
Yeah. I don't know. This might get me in trouble. I feel like I, I'm trying to figure out the best way to put it without making me sound like a total D. Uh, I feel like some of the biggest pitfalls, at least for like younger dudes, social media is such a thing. So like trying to be like the social media pastor where you get a bunch of shares and content and stuff, speaking at stuff, whatever. Like I feel like that's a big pitfall and a distraction where you focus so much on your own content that you don't focus on the ministry. That's a big one. And so I feel like that could be a pitfall. I'm like, my answer to people who ever ask me to do, like, how do you speak at things and be asked to be on podcasts? And I'm like, well, I feel like I just really focus and kill it in the current ministry that I'm in. And then people notice and then they ask me to be a part of it. So like, focus on
and
those.
there's a fine line there. I mean, because you're active on your
Yeah, I
social media.
do.
You share the stories of what God's doing in your ministry. And some people
Yeah,
aren't doing that, or some people are doing that, like,
for
tell
sure.
like,
like I post clips of me teaching and all that stuff, but I think for me it's like I know I have students following me, so for me it's more about for them than it
Right.
is about sharing it. And so like I want to help disciple them. And so I'm not saying don't post any of those things. I think it's more of a heart check of like it could be a distraction if you let it be. And I think it's powerful. I think it's, social media is the easiest way to share what's happening and what's going on. Like I do all the time. But it means nothing if my ministry's suffering. If my content's really good, but I still have unhealthy areas in my youth ministry, then it doesn't speak as loud. So I think that's a distraction. I think I think when maybe it's in the same vein as you see what other ministries are doing, and so therefore you want to copy what other ministries are doing. So like I'll give a shout out right now, like Ben Graves and Colby Delphs, both here in California, killing it with like campus stuff, like school clubs, hundreds of kids in the clubs, multiple campuses. Um, we're having one of them on our podcast this week that will come out on the youth ministry podcast talking about it specifically. But like I want to do what they're doing so bad, so bad. But they've also been in their spot for like 3 or 4 years, and they did the things that I said first. They got a healthy ministry, small groups, and leaders. And then once those were established, then they moved on to the next thing. So I feel like a lot of people get distracted when they see someone killing it in an area that they're not, that they're quick to abandon the three foundational things that I said in order to pursue the other thing, which gets them distracted and not as effective in with those things. Because they put in their time, they put in the work beforehand in order to get to doing school and outside activities. And I think part of it too, the other part that I think that's a distraction, I think this has been my own personal kick, has been going with relevant over spiritual. And I think for me, like I think students are thirsty for the spiritual things and being unapologetic about having that be a part of their ministry. Like Christianity's weird from the outside for any new kid coming in, like when they see what we do, they're like, this is weird, but not shying away from it and helping them understand why and what we do. So like example, that ended up working really, really well in our ministry. Last Wednesday was our last Wednesday night of the year. And typically before me coming here, they've had like a big Christmas party, big event. We switched it up to where we actually made something where we set up like 9 worship stations across the campus. So there's no message, no worship from stage, but all these different activities that they could do as a small group that were like different forms of worship. So like communion, where they would pray for a friend who didn't know who Jesus was and then light a candle so like they could be like a light to them. We had a station where like they had all these ropes, hundreds of ropes that I tied personally myself. That's what I did last week, like with a whole bunch of knots in them, where anxiety and stress is rampant in this culture in our ministry, in our Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and where they were to think about the things that gave them knots or stress. And as they untied the knots, they would pray through those things, where they would have the names of God listed out on a sheet of paper, and they would write down whatever one that like where God called them a different name. I am loved. I am forgiven. And we had a sheet of like, hello, my name is, and they write their name, like the name that God gave them under there. To confession, where they wrote down something, and we have a big cross on our campus where they would write down a confession and they place it at the foot of the cross and they would pray, for God to forgive and to move in their life. To a single acoustic guitar around the fire pits where songs would just be sung. So all these different stations around prayer requests where they were to write a prayer request and then pray for 5 others of all the other cards that were on this wall. And so like all of those, like, and by far it was like the response was, this is one of the best nights we've had in a long time. And I think part of it is because instead of being like relevant, trying to be like, oh, the big party, and not that those things are bad. We need all those things. But like, how do we bring in the why is summer camp? Sorry, I got a speaker in here. Why is summer camp the only thing and only time that we're having these spiritual things happen, where we could bring in spiritual things like from summer camp into a weekly? Hold on. Yikes, dude. Hold on. Do you hear that?
Yeah, a little bit. It's just I thought it was just kind of like you were heating up, and it was just sort of like the
No,
spirit that
just
took
all this.
over of like
I'm
angelic
in a,
music.
I'm in our like band green room, and I have like all of their stuff here.
There's
And
like a monitor for what's going on in the
there's a
worship center or
monitor.
whatever.
Yeah, super fun.
I really want to like leave this in.
Dude, do it. This is great because this is real life.
This is real.
I don't know how to turn it off. How do I do this?
Volume knob, power. I don't know. I'm like pretty quick to just pull like power cables out of stuff.
There we go. I figured it out. I turned it off. Anyways, that was super spiritual. Spiritual warfare. As I'm talking about spiritual things. No, I think like I think that's a distraction of like trying to do
Just
like
like
the
that speaker
cool.
is a distraction. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Sermon. Sorry, just preaching. Just preaching.
like all of those things. I think like none of those things are bad per se. Like I'll do a big event like when we come back after our break. We take a month off and for the holidays. When we come back, we're going to do a big event, but it's also going to have, you know, worship, message, and then a response time and prayer, like where students could receive. Like there's going to be spiritual things within what we're doing that I think students are thirsty for, but they don't know that they're thirsty. They're thirsty, they don't know what they're thirsty for. And I think that we have an opportunity to give them what I think the answer is that they're seeking, which is Jesus and the things that come along with it, and not to shy away from talking about the things that culture talks about and how Jesus is countercultural to those things. To invite some of the weird things of Christianity into what we're doing on a weekly basis, and be on a hey, if you're new, here's what communion is. This is why we're doing it weekly. Hey, if you're new, this is what baptism is. This is why this. Hey, if you're new, this is why we raise our hands during worship and jump around and be crazy. Like it's just kind of unapologetically. That's kind of been my stance. Unapologetically bringing in the spiritual nature of what Christianity brings, because I think they need it and they don't know that they want it. But when you
Well, I
offer
think
to them,
it's what the human spirit longs for. Like what
yeah,
like we. I mean, every soul is hungry and thirsty for truth. Every soul is hungry and thirsty for something, and it's why we're on this endless journey to find it. Until you get in the presence of God and taste and see that the Lord is good,
yeah,
then you
like
discover what it's really all about. I just think of a kiddo in my small group, my student ministry. He's a senior, but he started coming at the beginning of the year, and he was very vocal. He was like, when I first came, the singing was weird. He's like, I don't know what this is about. It's really weird. People are raising their hands. I don't get it. But he was like, it was, he started to come and just sort of be saturated in these spiritual things of seeing people get baptized, of sitting in worship and sitting in conversations about spiritual things and hearing the gospel. And it was like just amazing to see in the span of just a couple months how God like transformed this kid's heart, and I got the opportunity to baptize him, like 2 months after he started coming. And it was just an amazing thing to hear, just how, like what you're talking about, like being unapologetic about the things of the spirit, the things of God that are true, that that it turns out God knows what he's talking about when he puts these things in our lives and in his word to obey and to do, to not shy away from that. And I'm with you 100%. I think that's a huge distraction, is like, hey, we need to make this more palatable, instead of more biblical.
yeah. Well, I mean, dude, same anecdotal evidence to that as well. I had a first time kid come this last Wednesday with these worship stations. Was expelled from his school. You know, came because his sister started coming like a couple weeks before. Grandma dropped him off. Was hanging out uh like in front of the service, in front of this church. Safety guys brought him into the lobby, like, hey, just go hang in the lobby, like, tonight's a little bit so I ended up meeting him and started talking as all the groups were doing all the different stations and stuff. And I was telling him like, hey, tonight's, obviously kind of a little bit different night than what we typically do. I kind of explained to him all the different things that we got going on, how he'd be placed with his like, he's a 10th grader. You'd be placed with all the 10th grade dudes. You walk through the stations together. And I'm like, but don't feel obligated. Again, it's our last meeting of the year. We don't meet for another month. It's already a different night. Like, don't feel obligated. Like, you could chill here for a little bit, but I hope you come back. And as I was getting up to leave, he goes, no, I'm kind of interested to see what that is. Like, I don't know anything about Christianity or whatever, but all what you just said is sounds super interesting. And I ended up walking him, finding his group. They happened to be at the confession station, and I saw him afterwards, and he goes, "I'm like, hey man, like how was it? Like how was it just going around and like checking it out?" He's like, "It was a little weird." He's like, "But for some reason, I feel way more free than I did when I walked in, and I'll be back when you guys come back." And
Wow.
so, and it's like, okay, cool. Like that's, if anything, if I was even doubting that, him alone goes like, okay, so there is something there where the unapologetic of being spiritual and bringing in spiritual things, like just erased from my mindset of like, should I be doing this? No, we should be doing this. So it was really cool. It was super powerful.
Man, that's super encouraging, dude. And I mean, and I think like the principles there, this, just been woven through the whole conversation. Keep things simple, do what God's asking you to do, get out of the way, get your ego out of the way. Like, don't get distracted with all this other stuff and just focus on, going the direction of pointing students to Jesus and following his word. I know we're running out of time here. There's a lot of things I want to pick your brain on. I wish we had more time. We didn't get into digital ministry. We didn't get into online. We didn't get into that stuff. We may need to have another conversation about that.
You could just come. We could just have another. We could just have me back on. That'd
Yes.
be cool.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
would be fun. Yeah. That would be cool if you're down. Yeah. A lot of other things, that I want to get into, but just as we kind of wrap up, just in light of everything you've already shared, just any last words of just encouragement, anything practical to walk out of this conversation with for anybody listening.
Yeah. I mean, practical wise, I think it's just more emphasis of what we kind of chatted about. If I were to summarize, is I feel like a lot of what's keeping us from moving forward is we don't have a good understanding of what's happening now. And so if you're looking for a change or needing an adjustment, like take a really good hard look at what's happening now. Ask your students, ask leaders, like figure out like what do you want the answers to. Come up with this simple Google survey form, send it out to them, and then start to make decisions based off of that. Keep it simple in the sense of nail down your service, nail down your leader culture, nail down your small group setup first before you move on to anything else. And then if you don't, it's really because it's really easy to get stuck in the weekly grind. Time to every other week where you could only think about things 6 months from now. That's where I think you kind of get into because if you do the first two things, you'll kind of know what's happening now, and then it allows you to dream better for future things based off what's happening currently. And it helps you kind of set up a way more strategic calendar when you place things, how you place things, what adjustments you need to make in the future. Those are my three.
I think there's something there for everybody. There's something there for me. It's a good reminder. And I think that if you just walk out of listening to this and you put that into practice, I think everybody's going to see something start to grow and start to expand in their ministry. So, dude, I appreciate that. Thankful for your time. And yeah, this is a good one to grab the notepad for. So, thanks, man.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. And leave the music in. That'll be fun. That'll be awesome.